Thank you.
Welcome everyone to our OCD Texas Learn at Lunch. This is our Journeying Through OCD as Young Adults peer panel. So this is a nice little change for us. Normally we're doing just a professional, just CEU driven talk, but we wanted to kind of spice things up a bit and add in a peer panel discussion. So we have three wonderful women with us today who are going to be sharing about their experience just navigating life with OCD and what that looks like. And so we will definitely open that up to questions. And really, I'll let you ladies kind of, I guess, set the terms if you want to leave questions to the end. What would y'all prefer? Do you want people to be able to kind of talk throughout or leave questions for the end?
We were going to go through just like a little overview of our stories, and then we can do a ton of questions at the end.
Okay, sounds great. And then we have Katie Rothfelder, who is our OCD Texas Austin ambassador, who will be
I'll edit this part of the recording out.
Oh, okay. So hair froze. I was thinking I froze.
Yeah.
I was like, man.
Maybe. Oh, you're back.
maybe
You're
I should.
back.
I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to go through everyone's bios. I think that might take up too much time as I was thinking about it. But we have Emily Mannikko, Kate Mumey, and Courtney Schmidt who are here just to share more about their experiences with us. And so thank you, ladies, for joining us and taking the time. We really appreciate this.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Or Jenny, are you able to spotlight Courtney?
Oh. Yeah. Scared me for a second there.
Okay,
Here we
it's all
go.
three of us. Okay, sweet. So we were going to start off just with a quick introduction of each of us and where we're at in life right now, and then go back and tell a little bit about our journeys with OCD. So I'll go ahead and start. My name is Kate Mumey. I am a 22-year-old with OCD. I'm a senior sociology major at the University of Houston down here in Texas. I am graduating in December with a bachelor's in sociology and will be working at a nonprofit. So that's where I'm at right now. Courtney, you want to go next?
Yep. My name is Courtney Schmidt. I'm 26 years old. I currently work as the assistant controller for an oil and gas-based partnership here in San Antonio. San Antonio native, born here, lived in the same house my entire life. And I have OCD, generalized anxiety, and depression. So, Emily?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Mannikko. I am 25 years old, and I'm originally from Reno, Nevada. I'm the oldest of 4 sisters, and I will be starting my associate degree this coming fall at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. So I'm excited about that. So that's a little bit about me.
Yay. And so we wanted to go back and give a little bit more about our stories with OCD and becoming young adults and how that's affected us. I'll go ahead and start. I have had symptoms of OCD since I was probably 5 or 6. And I wasn't diagnosed until I was almost 20. And so I was misdiagnosed over and over again with generalized anxiety and different phobias, and never got anywhere close to the right treatment, was never presented with ERP as an option. And so I did what I thought I was supposed to do. So I went through high school, listened to what my OCD was telling me, did compulsions, ended up starting my college journey, and going 2 years, kind of just trying to push it off until I'll deal with this later. I can't do this right now. I'm supposed to be having fun and I'm not having fun. And all of this stuff was bubbling up. And by the end of my sophomore year of college, I knew that not only was something not right, that I couldn't exist the way that I was existing, and that it wasn't benefiting me or the people that I was around. And so I, at the start of my junior year, about a week into school, called my parents and said, I need to come home and I need to figure this out. I need to have a real conversation about what this is. And thankfully, we had a family friend who was able to recommend to get an evaluation for obsessive compulsive disorder. We thankfully also lived in Houston. And so I had what was then the Houston OCD program available to me, is now McLean OCD Institute of Houston. And that truly saved my life. I came home in August or early September of that year. By the end of September, I was in IOP. I had a wonderful therapist that actually understood what was going on with my brain for the first time. And slowly but surely, everything about how I was living changed. I withdrew from the school I was going to and decided to take on treatment as a full-time thing for the next few months. Completed IOP. I still see therapists from HOP to this day. And in the midst of going through treatment, found out that the things that I was doing, a lot of the choices I was making when it came to like big picture stuff in my young adult life, was because I was trying to pick the safest option, whatever my brain could handle in that moment and what my OCD told me I was allowed to do. And it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't the life that meant something to me. And so with the support of my therapy team, my friend, Emily, who actually we met at treatment together at the same time, and it became best friends over that period in our lives. With that support in my life, I was able to apply and transfer to the University of Houston to study sociology. And I'm actually working towards going into church work in the Episcopal Church and working in destigmatizing mental health in faith communities. And so that will hopefully be my full-time job one day, will just be to care for other people that were in my situation. And yeah, so that was kind of the overview. There's obviously a lot of other things that happened in the span of that time, but that's what OCD and treatment has looked like for me. Emily, you want to go?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I'm so proud of you. So my goodness. So to start off everything, growing up, I always struggled with anxiety. It really started off like a separation anxiety, especially from my parents, my mom especially, growing up. But that's really kind of all we thought that it was just anxiety and, you know, the intrusive thoughts that I had. I just thought it was anxiety, just attached all of it to that. And just throughout just the years and growing up, just the anxiety and intrusive thoughts just became more debilitating, and constantly wanting to get reassurance from my mom. She was kind of that person, that reassurance person that I needed a lot of the time, but it was just feeding my OCD constantly, and it wasn't helping my OCD at all at the time. But I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know that it was OCD. And finally, it just got to the point when I reached high school that it was affecting my quality of life. I had to stop going to school. Social anxiety was debilitating. It just was affecting everything. And so I started, all of the help that I've received has had to be out of state. The resources that is offered for OCD is very minimal where I'm from in Reno. So I had to go away. And I first started going to outpatient therapy. But then I just realized it wasn't, I needed more. And so I had to stop going to school, and I at the time went to residential treatment at 18 at the Houston OCD program, back when it was the Houston OCD program. And I spent there for 2 months. And that was where my whole life changed. I started building my hierarchy, really starting to build off of my triggers and tackling them one by one. And that's just how I started my treatment, and giving myself that patience and time, because when I first started, I just wanted to like hit the ground running and just go. But, you know, that's, it takes time and patience and a lot of grace. I think especially having to grieve where I thought my life was going to go. I thought I was going to finish high school and go to prom and have all of these life experiences like, you know, younger peers our age, and even now, and realizing that that it's okay that our paths are different, and that they can lead maybe even better places than we thought ever could. And so for me, going to treatment residential when I was 18, I think at the time that I went, saved me. I think my OCD would have gotten much worse if I hadn't started ERP. That was really the golden tool for OCD, as we all know. And I completed treatment. I finally graduated high school. I was able to finish high school. And I recently had a follow-up outpatient treatment. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. For when I was 23, and at the now McLean OCD Institute of Houston. And that is where I met Kate. And being able to meet people that can relate could relate to me, I feel is so important in healing in the process, because it is scary in the beginning when you don't know what's going on and just learning. So being able to rely on the treatment team and finding my voice and was really the root of my treatment as well. So that's all of it in a nutshell. I could go on, like Kate said, for hours, but that's really kind of everything in a nutshell. But I'm really happy to be here and get to be with all of you. So thank you for having us.
Great.
Whenever
And
you're
so
ready for it.
time for my story. Thank you both for sharing. You guys are both super inspirational. And I've loved working with you up to this point. So I'm joining their friendship, I guess. I didn't know them previously. So
Yeah.
Nonetheless, so my OCD journey kind of started around 2009. That was the year or the summer before I was going into high school. I'd always been an anxious child, always dealt with generalized anxiety, but something that year just seemed different. It seemed like I was just having a lot of thoughts that didn't make any sense. And they were persistent and I had no clue what was going on. Just kind of asking people around me, do you have these thoughts? Do you think of these things? And I get yeses and, kind of, they're not certain. They're just kind of not telling me it's okay to make me think that it was normal. But I went ahead and did a Google search, which I don't recommend. And right away, OCD came up and I read, the first 5 or 6 symptoms and I was like, okay, there's definitely something else going on. I think I have OCD. But I didn't take much action at that point. I just went to my, primary care doctor and was kind of mentioning I have anxiety. I think I might have OCD as well. And at that time I was just put on some medication, like anti-anxiety medication, nothing else. And that got me through on all the way through high school. I was still battling really heavily with the OCD, but didn't recognize that there was a treatment for it, or, wasn't going into counseling. Really young at the time still too, obviously, trying to just get through high school. And I went, like I said, I went through all the way through high school with it. I had a kind of various themes hit and miss. But I ended in high school with scrupulosity coming up as a heavy theme. And I didn't recognize what it was. I just thought that I was like, okay, I've turned, I just want to be really religious now, and I want to be really into my faith. But it was really compulsive, and I was kind of shutting everything out of life and felt like everything was a sin and couldn't, really constricting my lifestyle. I went into college with that same mindset, but I think within a year of college, I did start seeking treatment from a Christian psychologist in my area. And I had, I was with her for maybe a few months, and I think I just didn't want to put the effort into therapy. And so I stopped going with, after the first few months. Tried to continue on with just medication. At that time, I was put on an antidepressant as well to help out. And, went through another year or so until I realized that I was essentially at rock bottom, and there was nothing in my life that wasn't being controlled. Even though it was scrupulosity and overall had kind of a religious theme, it was turning into contamination OCD or sexual OCD or just all kinds of things. And it was determining what I could wear, how, what time I could, leave the room for classes. I'd have to kind of leave classes to go do compulsions and things like that. So it really took over. And at that point, I was like, I'm at rock bottom, and I've got to seek help because I can't keep on living like this. And so I, again, got back in contact with the same psychologist, and I've been seeing her since then. That would be around 2015, 16. And I continued to go through the therapy. And at first, again, it was, ERP is really scary at first when you have that head-on anxiety and you're like, this is supposed to make me feel better. And so as it went on and I recognized that it truly did work, I applied it to some smaller themes at first and then started taking on scrupulosity as a whole. Within, a couple years later, I was starting to recognize this works, and I feel like my OCD is becoming managed. Around the end of 2017 into 2018 is when I would say it really did get to a period of recovery, and I was finding happiness. I was able to go out and enjoy being at college or being with my friends outside of college. Feel like I was getting a lot of my life back, because I definitely felt like I was chained up at that point beforehand. And so releasing those chains really felt great. And up to this point, I'm still there. It's definitely it doesn't truly get cured. And so there's it's an up and down road. My OCD is, still on the prowl all the time, looking for a new theme or a new way to get me. But up to this point, it's still scrupulosity for me as well. But I do know that ERP therapy works, and I'm very big time advocate for that. And I'm happy to see people like Emily and myself and Kate being able to talk about our stories and our experiences, because now that I've gone into a point where I'm managed, I definitely feel like it would advocating needs to happen. And so in my case, I'm very into my faith in a non-OCD way as well. And so I started a Christian support group on Facebook and have about 2,000 members in there and internationally. And so I've tried to do that. And then with social media, I've been trying to also do my personal social media and a little bit of other advocating outside. So I feel like my journey also kind of sparked a light in me. While I'm not any sort of psychology field or directly can help people, I want to advocate from the outside and show people that there's a way to hope.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I'm super excited. This has been really great. There were a couple things that we talked about beforehand that we definitely wanted to bring up that have affected us in all of our journeys and as young adults. We really touched already on education and career stuff and how that all gets kind of thrown in when you're dealing with OCD and the expectations that people have. One thing we did want to cover was what it's like dealing with the more taboo themes of OCD when you're a young adult, and how to handle the shame and guilt and things that come up with that. And I'll touch on how that's affected me. I think it's been a little bit different because the themes that I started out with when I came into treatment that had been going on since I was a really young child all the way until I was a young adult were seen as the socially acceptable themes. It was about protecting my family, keeping everyone safe, not wanting anyone to get lost or get hurt, all of these things. And it was debilitating for me, but for other people, it was oh, hey, I understand that. Everyone's worried, that their parents or their siblings would be hurt. And so I thought it would stay that way forever. And I remember being at a relapse prevention class at McLean and being like, that's never going to happen to me. Like, my themes will never shift. That's just not my thing. And I finished IOP, decided to go back to school, didn't know what I was doing, still trying to figure that out. And my first attempt going back to school was really soon. It was like a week after I left treatment. And it was really hard, and I didn't like where I was. And I was starting to realize that I needed to make, bigger changes outside of my OCD about how I was doing. And I started to get really like sad, and I was starting to grieve the situation that I was in. And so my OCD was like, here's a new thing we can latch onto. And so for the first time, I started struggling with suicidal OCD, or the fear that at some point, if this didn't get better, that I would be forced to kill myself. And that was way scarier to talk about. I felt like I couldn't bring it up, or I would be kind of written off, or I'd be hospitalized, all of these things that you're told. And so even from my therapist, who at this point knew everything about me, and knew all of the themes that I had struggled with when I came back from that first try going back to school, I didn't tell her that this new stuff had been propping up for probably a good like month and a half, seeing her every week. And I just thought that this was like so outside of OCD. It couldn't be that. These had to be real. I had to like keep this hidden. And so I really going through that, and then finally telling her, and her just being like, okay, but like, oh, I've like heard everything because I specialize in OCD and ERP. That reaction and the compassion that came with that, of how hard it must have been for me to say that, was incredible. And the thing that I think helped most was having the support of my therapist in telling my family members what this theme was and what it meant, because it scared them too. No one wants to hear that you could think about that, or that you're worried about that kind of stuff. And so being able to explain that this is OCD and that OCD can behave this way was really important. And I think it really broke down a lot of the shame and fear that I had about disclosing a theme like that. And it's something I haven't talked about publicly before now. So I was really glad that I could get to do that, because I've met so many people now that are like, oh yeah, I've had that theme too, and I've just never talked about it. So yeah, I think that the themes that are seen as more taboo, they can be harder to disclose, but they're treated the exact same way. And so understanding that it's just OCD, that it can just be OCD, and it can be treated just the same as the themes that made more sense to people that didn't have OCD, took away a lot of the power that theme had over me for a while. So yeah, do either of y'all want to?
Yeah, totally. I can specifically relate to with Kate. I think especially for me, one of my main themes has been sexually intrusive thoughts. That's been my main one. And it carries such shame. Not that the other themes don't, but I think just there's this just feeling, I don't know, that I just can, for me specifically, it's just this different kind of shame. It just feels, I just felt like I was this bad person, this terrible person. And so a lot of that was, it was hard to talk about and do in exposures, because I didn't want to talk about my sexually intrusive thoughts. I didn't want to talk about them with anybody at the same time. So that was, that can be, especially in the beginning of treatment, that was really hard for me to want to disclose. But part of it too, for me, was talking about it. But then also for me, it could turn into confessing. So being really careful with how to go about them. So I'd say really for me, because it can be, about family members, animals, children, like, so for people, I know that can be really, really difficult to talk about. So that was one that I really wanted to bring up. And definitely harm OCD as well. I think for people, especially I know for me as well, it's really scary and can be really terrifying, having these thoughts come into your head and feeling like you're the only one that has them, but realizing that no, like you don't, you just have OCD, and where your mind just sticks to thoughts and others don't. And being able to differentiate that throughout treatment is super important. But yeah, those were a couple ones that I really wanted to bring up, but I wasn't sure, Court, if you had any other ones that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, sure. I can actually bounce off of you mentioning kind of the sexual intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of scrupulosity, probably 8 or 9 years worth of that theme alone. And what's very taboo is, first of all, the scrupulosity itself is pretty much misunderstood in a lot of the faith communities. But then you add on other types of themes. In my case, a lot of other themes are attaching to my scrupulosity. So you mentioned the sexual theme. Well, if I'm having sexually intrusive thoughts that are also religious, that's like another level of what's going on, and a lot of shame and not sure why am I thinking these things. You can't really go to people in the church and say, well, I'm having these thoughts, and explain it to them, because they're going to look at you kind of like, what's wrong with you? There's a lot of misconception about what's going on. And so definitely that the way, in my case, at least, a lot of themes mixing in scrupulosity would bring in more shame. And so something, sexual is the most obvious one to me that brought in more shame. Because in general with scrupulosity, you just kind of feel shame, or that you're not good enough in your faith, or you've constantly sinned. And so to bring in sexual thoughts, which, are bad in your faith to begin with, and then mix them in with scrupulosity, it becomes a big mess, basically. But there was also something in high school that was one of my first themes that I dealt with. And I dealt a lot with HOCD, which is homosexual OCD. And that one, I had nothing against people that were homosexual or anything. It was just that I was having these constant thoughts that maybe I was, even though I knew I wasn't. And of all things, I was in an all-girls school as well. So it was like constant exposure to it. I just didn't know what I was going through at the time. But with that one, it's definitely misunderstood, because I think it looks like, that you are against homosexuals, or that you had that, that for some reason you don't want to be that way because you're against it. In my case, I didn't recognize what it was, and just thought that I was attracted to girls, but it was very obsessive. And I had a fear of being with my best friend at the time, or we'd go to lunch and I would just kind of sit there, and I didn't want to look at her, or didn't want to have a conversation, because I was so scared that something between me and her would happen when we were just eating. And so I think that one's also misunderstood, just because it looks like it's something that it's not. It's not, that I was scared of being homosexual necessarily. It was just a fear of not being true to myself and being who I really am. So that's what I would go to with the taboo topics.
Yeah. I'm really glad we got to touch on this, because I think that we all want to shy away from them. And yeah, so just calling them out is really important. We also wanted to talk about like what we would tell someone either like with a new diagnosis, or that was going through like a really tough time in treatment, or starting treatment. And so does someone want to start?
Yeah, I would love to start. So for someone that would just be starting, or someone that just got a new diagnosis, for some people, I feel like it can be relieving, and for others, it can be a difficult time, I think, just trying to process it all. And I think there's no right or wrong way to feel, because there's so many feelings that you're going through all at once, and realizing that you can feel both. You can feel grief and hope for a better future for yourself. So that's one that I'd really want to share, especially in the beginning. If you have any.
You wanna go?
Yeah. I would definitely say, like just with Emily, that what she said, there's no certain way to feel. And in my case, once I recognized what I had, I was really relieved, but then I didn't seek the correct treatment right away. And so while it's good to have that feeling of relief and recognize what it is, also don't stop there. Continue to seek out the treatment, try to find a way to get help. And I think also we, like as a whole, we need to work on making sure that therapy is not as stigmatized as it is, because it's definitely, I think, something that holds people back from wanting to get help. And so recognizing that like therapy truly can help you, and just at least giving it a shot, giving it, a couple sessions and seeing if you find any relief or find any help talking to somebody, I think that really helps a lot. And then also now with social media, as popular as it is, there's a lot of resources out there, other people that will talk openly about their OCD, and getting involved with those accounts or with those people, I think it really helps to form kind of a community around you, because sometimes you don't have it in your immediate family, you don't have it in your immediate friends. So when you can, group with others that are, like-minded and also suffering in the same way, I think that can really help you along your route, because you recognize that you can find support and that you're not alone at all.
Yeah. I think I would want to add two things. One is just that when I first got my diagnosis, it felt really relieving. And so I wanted to attach everything to it. Like, okay, this explains like everything in my life, and like I can just focus on this forever. And you aren't your OCD. OCD is a part of what you're dealing with and the way that your life is being affected. One of those things is OCD, if that's what you have. And being able to take the time at the beginning of treatment to really like extricate myself from my OCD helped so much in being like allowing myself to fight against OCD, because it wasn't fighting against myself, it was finding who I was, living into that. And so you don't have to like become the label. You can just handle it. You can go through treatment, you can do all these things. And in addition to that is that treatment exists, and treatment also can be found, and you can get it regardless of where you are. I personally, like, one of the reasons that I found advocacy so important when I was going through treatment is that I realized the privileged position I was in at a IOP that I could go to, that I could say yes to, that if my insurance didn't cover it, I could have made it work. And that sitting there, I was like, there's so many people that are in my exact position that can't sit here right now. And I have really like spent a lot of time researching and trying to find ways to help people get treatment. And so like just continue to ask and like pound down the doors, because you deserve treatment regardless of your situation. And there's ways to get it. There's insurance advocates, there's sliding scale, like there are things that will help you. And yeah, so there's hope basically at the end of the day. There's a lot of hope. And then the last thing we wanted to talk about for sure before we like open it up to more questions was what we would talk about with like people that are being apprehensive or like hesitant to treatment once they have started. And I can start with this, that I wasn't ready to do treatment until I was. And thankfully that was right when I got diagnosed, but that's because I had to hit a rock bottom for me to want to do it. I didn't know that I'd been presented with the option of ERP. I'd never been presented with it by like a therapist or a doctor. But living in Houston, I had actually heard Jim McInvale talk about it before. And I remember it was in my high school auditorium sitting there and listening to like what ERP was, and him telling Liz's story, which was funny because then she was in charge of my treatment. But hearing Liz's story and going, oh, I'm so glad I never have to do that. That sounds awful. Like that's terrifying. Because that's what I was latching onto, because I was the kid in the audience that needed it. And I saw it as like the worst possible thing of having to face my fears, having to do all this stuff. And so I was apprehensive to treatment. I just didn't know that that's what it was. And so once I got into treatment at 20 and was really leaning in, I had to get to a point where I said, like, I looked back on how many years of my life and how many opportunities I had missed because I was listening to OCD and no one else. And even really what added up for me was the little opportunities. It wasn't big things or really careers. It was that I had missed lunches with my best friends. I had spent less time with my family because I was avoiding them. I had done all these things that I didn't want to be doing, and I had lost all this time. And there was a moment at the beginning of treatment where I was like, okay, no more. Like, you don't get another year of my life. You don't get another day. You don't get another hour. Like, we're going to do this. And no matter how uncomfortable ERP can feel, especially starting it and not knowing what it's going to feel like, it can't be worse than what I've been doing in the place that OCD has brought me to. And so this short-term discomfort that is treatment, especially like intensive treatment or early treatment, has paid off like a million times. Like every day that I get to get up and like go to work at a place that I really like, and go to a college for something that I care about, talk to Emily and like be honest with a friend about things, or engage with my family. I'm living with my family right now because of the pandemic, and I've actually gotten to spend real positive quality time with them, which I didn't realize I hadn't been able to do in so long, because every moment around them was trying to make sure that nothing bad ever happened to them in the future. And I missed all that time. So I missed a lot of my childhood, a good part of the beginning of my young adult years. And now I refuse to give it the rest of my young adult years and the rest of my life and the choices that I'm going to make. And so if you can get to a point where you are willing to make that commitment to yourself, you won't regret it. So anyone else want to add?
I feel like I don't have to say anything. Like, I mean, yeah, it's just that it can be overwhelming and uncertain in the beginning, but in the long run, it's so worth it. Just your life and just doors begin to open when you say yes to treatment, and you say yes to fear, and you just gain so much, and you realize really how strong you are, and just don't give up, and recovery is possible. You just have to put in the work, and it's a choice every day, but there's people out there who get it and understand, and you're never ever alone. So yeah, thank you.
Now I'm really gonna have a hard time adding on. I would definitely say to those who are apprehensive to treatment, even just from my personal story alone, to see how I've grown over the years for that. In some ways to be an example, because 5 years back, I was in college, barely able to get into classes without, having to run out to the bathroom and do compulsions, or, that morning I went through multiple shirts because I couldn't pick the right one based off my OCD, or just everything that I was doing essentially was OCD related. And that's something I mentioned at the beginning, that, scrupulosity was so kind of stuck with me that any decision was religious, or I was going to hell for it, or I was sinning for it. And so that really locked me up in like what I thought was change at the time. But as I really started to go into therapy and really applied, even it was just maybe the shirt, trying to pick out a different color shirt and feel that anxiety and recognize that it's okay. After you go through all that fear and anxiety, and the next day you're like, oh, I can pick out any shirt now. Maybe not the next day, maybe the next month, but regardless, you can start to feel that ease, and you recognize, now I'm not having trouble doing certain things anymore. And as you can continue on, I, took on a small theme of a shirt, went to overall, all the themes in my life that I was seeing it, and applying it kind of consistently to everything, allowed me to get away from running out of classrooms to do compulsions, or, not being able to talk to friends normally because I was scared of something I would say would be wrong, or I'd go to hell for it. Being able to be more present with friends and family, and being excited to go places with them. And so just recognizing that therapy can really bring you from a point of feeling like you're desperate, you're at rock bottom, there's not much left to be happy about, to recognizing that you can face your fears and that there's freedom and that you can live a happy life with OCD. So I definitely would add that to anybody that's apprehensive.
Yes, absolutely. And I also wanted to add that I think at the beginning of treatment, I didn't really understand what the goal was, because my goal my entire life had been to get rid of the anxiety. And so when my therapist like presented ERP and was like, so we're not getting rid of the anxiety, I was then why am I here? What's the point? And the thing that I found, and I found thankfully really quickly through ERP, was that sometimes the fear doesn't always get easier, especially right up front, but the choices do start to get easier. The choice to continue doing the thing that means more to you than the anxiety, those choices over time become like reflexes. And that's how you start living your life again. And so, yeah, the idea that we're not getting rid of anxiety might sound like the opposite of what you want to do. But it's the way forward, and the only way through is through. So yeah. Katie, was there any questions or anything you wanted us to touch on?
I don't see any questions in the chat just yet, so maybe we can just invite questions. I just want to take a second to say thank you guys. Having OCD is already really hard, and then to be able to even take a step here and make the choice, like you were saying, Kate, to kind of take a brave, bold move in this way, you're helping so many people. And so thank you guys for showing up for us, and for other people who will kind of watch this and see. Very cool. But if anyone does have any questions that they want to ask Kate, Emily, or Courtney, feel free to drop it in the chat.
Yes,
Or I guess say it out loud. You could just unmute yourself.
that too.
So I'll well, yes, again, thank you for joining us and sharing so much about your experience. This has been really nice to be able to see. I've known many of you for a while, and it's nice to see where you're at now in this process and the stage of your journey. But what has your experience been like? Obviously coming from where you are saying, like, it was hard to just talk about it openly, to now being able to, in a very public format, and really sort of take on this role of an OCD advocate and really sort of, make yourself vulnerable in that way. What has your experience, or how has that been received? What are people's responses to you talking about some of these more taboo forms of OCD?
I would say for me, in my own experience, especially from my parents and just family and friends, just the dramatic change and just growth that has happened for me is just like so hard to explain. It's for them just to be able to see me live a full quality life, when for years they weren't sure if I would leave my house. I think that just shows I think just the growth, and just also just hard work that it takes for people with OCD to get up every day and make a choice to fight against it, because it's not easy, and it never gets a day off, that's for sure. So but yeah, that answers that question. I hope it does.
Oh, thank you.
The way that I kind of moved from like a full focus on treatment into a more like advocate and maintenance role was really essential for me to continue treatment, because talking about it, I had to keep doing my work. And so it was like an accountability thing as well. But then also I was so relieved by the fact that there was an answer, and then confounded by the idea that no one had told me the answer before then, that I wanted to like shout it from the rooftops once I was out of treatment. And I found that every time I talk about it, there's someone in my life who, they might not have OCD. They go, oh my God, this sounds like what my daughter's going through, or this sounds like what one of my grandchildren or my sister or whatever has been going through. And then being able to watch them go into treatment, or they finally get to hear that answer, or read a book about loving someone with OCD, or asking me questions, like that makes talking about it when it's really uncomfortable like so worth it. And I think we're the first like generation where we've had some role models in that. So we've had Liz, like we've had the IOCDF, and so there's like a trail now, and I'm so thankful for them. I tell Liz like every time I talk to her that I just like I was able to do the things that I could do, and was able to talk about it, and was able to get treatment at all because of the things that she did when she was coming out of treatment and when she was doing those things. And if I can leave a little bit for the next person that really needs it, then everything I've done is worth it. So that's how I did it, and that's why I do.
Yeah, in my case, I would say once I recognized that recovery was possible, one thing I wanted to do was start kind of targeting more of a faith-based group for myself. I wanted to have more people around me that had the same faith as me. So that led me to starting my own group on Facebook, which led me to more people to support me as well. So that was kind of my opening into advocacy. And then as I recognized, okay, well, I can make friends from around the world that have it. We can all talk about it. Now I'm going to continue to bring this out into the open to my closer friends and my family. So once I think I realized that there were a lot of other people that were struggling, it gave me more initiative to advocate not only for myself, but for them. And to recognize, there's a big stigma, and we need to try to do our best to really get what OCD is across to people. And so it started with social media, and a lot of mine is still on social media, and it's continued that way. But I've done it to where I do it both into support groups and on my personal Facebook, which is definitely the more vulnerable part. It's definitely not talking to other people that have it because they understand. Telling, everybody they know on Facebook, like, here, this is what I'm going through, and even saying things like it's contamination, or it's religious, or it's sexual, or whatever it may be. I'm sure, I've had negative feedback that I have, in people's minds that I'm not aware of, but for the most part, it's been very rewarding because I've had a lot of people reaching out to me, a lot of positive comments, people that want to advocate, people that have it that reach out to me and say, oh, I've had it too. I'm really glad that you're speaking about it. Just things like that. People in my close friend circle that I didn't know were struggling will reach out now. And so I think once you become vulnerable and recognize that even though you might get a little bit of negativity, the positive always is much greater, that it makes you want to continue doing the advocating. And so once I recognized that I could have a support group around me and that people would be accepting of me regardless of whether or not I had the disorder, definitely made it kind of opened a road for me to continue on to advocate for those who are going through the same thing.
Okay, so Jenny asked if there are any memories of ERP experiences that were turning points. I definitely thought of one immediately that Emily knows, because it's kind of my, like, I go back to it every time, which was my third day in treatment, which was also like the day after I got diagnosed. And we live in Houston. I was doing treatment in Houston, which is a swamp. And so one of my biggest fears, like themes that OCD had kind of latched onto that I still am not a big fan of, but we deal with it because we live here, is like inclement weather. And so anything to do with the weather that's not like a perfectly nice sunny day would get my anxiety up. And so the third day we had what was supposed to just be like a series of really bad thunderstorms, and it turned into a tropical storm, and the entire city flooded. And so I was at treatment, and we were just watching this like street in the Heights like flood, and all of the trash cans from Sahara was there, like float down the street, and we were like trying to get people's cars out. It was like wild. And I was sitting in like the dining room, like where classes took place, and just like sobbing. I was like, I can't do this. Like, whatever this is, I'm not able to do it. And I thankfully had my therapist and one of our resident counselors that were like, okay, we're digging in, because today is like the day that we're going to really start this. And they let me just cry and like feel it until it was over. By the end of the day, thankfully I had parents that lived in the city that were like, we're going to come like help you drive home because we don't know how to get home. And it was all of the things that I really hated about uncertainty happening at one time. And I remember later in treatment talking with that same residential counselor about like that day was so inspiring for me, but at the time I didn't know it because I was just purely terrified. And she was like, oh yeah, I didn't think you were going to come back after that one because that was really hard, really fast. And I did. And so the next time that I made the choice to come back to treatment, that next Monday, it was like a Friday, and I came back that next Monday, and I was all in by that point. And so that was a really big turning point for me because it was really, really painful. And I said yes anyway. And I didn't have to get to a point where I felt comfortable. My like distress didn't ever really hit zero before I left that day. But I continued. And so being able to do that meant that I could keep going. So that was mine. That one. Emily knows that one because I'm like, remember that day?
I remember. So one of my main ERP experiences that was a really big turning point for me was when I was doing residential, and it was my last day in treatment, and I was doing my last exposure this was my big one, and it was to go, and I didn't think my therapist at the time could pull it off, but she was able to get a tour of a county jail, of going and touring a county jail. So I was like, oh my gosh, you made it happen. And I remember that day. And I will never forget that day. I went with one of our residential counselors, and he came with me, and I remember going down the elevator and standing in a cell and having to really feel what it would be like, because I was terrified of jail and school shootings and stuff like that. So that was my really big exposure that I had to face, and I let myself cry, feel it all. And that was a major, major turning point in my recovery was doing that. So I would definitely say that was a big turning point in my life. I think that's where I really started to grasp uncertainty more. I don't think I was totally there yet, but I was able to accept that I was never going to get the answer that I wanted, and that not knowing was going to have to be enough. So that was would have to say that was my big one. What about you, Court?
Yeah, and in my case, thinking back, I don't have like one day or one moment where I was like, this was definitely the biggest exposure ever. But the way that my OCD was kind of webbed over my life, I would definitely say where I noticed the biggest transition was when I was first taking on kind of like smaller little exposures. So it might be like, I wouldn't write notes in my notebook in college. Like I went probably 4 out of my 5 years without writing like notes down at all. And so I would, write notes and not erase them, not, take the page and throw it away. Or I went years without taking pictures because I would delete them all off my phone. I wouldn't keep them. I had obsessions about what they meant or putting meaning to them. And so doing little things like, okay, take a picture and keep that picture allowed me. And then I would feel the anxiety and say, okay, I'm having, think the thoughts, agree with them or accept them, whatever it might be that brings me through that anxiety. As I continued to face those little exposures, it led me to recognizing that I could face it as a whole. because obviously with OCD, even though I'd face a little exposures, it would the next day have a new one for me. And I'm like, okay, here we go again. And so recognizing that, you know, if I could just recognize immediately when it was OCD and face it as a whole and recognize, okay, well, it's pretty much all related to my scrupulosity. Let's take on scrupulosity and not just take on the notebook or the phone or whatever it might be that's trying to hold me back that day. Recognizing that if I went throughout that day, facing the exposures as I could find them, that allowed me to truly feel like I was more free. Because at first it was kind of like I was just treating like one symptom at a time and it wasn't fully going away. And then I recognized, okay, let me treat my entire brain at one time, all of the OCD. And that really brought a lot more freedom.
Yeah. And I think a cool thing that happened for me was that was something my therapist did that was really helpful, that I still do now, is like when those really big exposures would come up, which they still do, she would always like continually ask me, like, why are we doing it? Like, why are we continuing this thing? And it would annoy me because I was like, I just need to get through this, Bridget. And then, but it was so helpful because one was like driving someone that I care about in a car, because I was terrified of them getting hurt and it being my fault. And I think about it, I'm like, I want to drive my future kids. I want to drive the people that I'm like going to date in my life. I want to drive my brother around. And being able to do that now, being like, why am I going to church? I'm terrified of sitting there. Like, what if something bad happens at church today? It's like, well, I want to live in a church. I want to work in the church. I want to do the rest of my life there. Like, this has bigger significance to me. And so I would definitely recommend, if you're like stuck in big exposures where you're just like, I'm going to quit, like I'm going to quit. Those are the moments to like really dig into why you're still doing it, because there's a reason you start. So
Totally.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
that does. I think we're like getting to the end of our hour. Oh my God.
Yes. I think we have one more little question, Kate. Okay, so we have one from Lauren, and she was wondering the degree of freedom that each of us feel from OCD on a day-to-day basis as we work through recovery.
Yeah, I'll take this on. I never thought that I would have any. So each moment that I got a little bit more was totally enough for that day. And now looking back, about 2 years, a little over 2 years, the start of treatment, I'm in a completely different degree of freedom and place in my life. I don't deal with every part of my OCD every day, whereas before, wake up to go to bed, and sometimes in my dreams, and like it was just a continual thing. Now it is something that I deal with as it comes up, which is just so vastly different. And also the degree of freedom that I have is that I know now, and I trust myself, that I will always make the choice to not do the compulsion. And there comes like a freedom with knowing that, and knowing that I can name OCD and that I'm good at it, at figuring out what this thing is, this OCD. And even today, talking to my therapist about like, I'm in a maintenance stage, and I never thought I would be able to say that out loud, that I like am at a time when I don't need therapy every week or every 2 days as I was doing before. I'm down to like once a month. And that is just a free life, knowing that I can trust when I need support and when I don't. So that's where I'm at.